Charles Kuralt had a knack for reminding America of its human side. The CBS newsman died Friday in New York, but left his road trip tales as a legacy.
If I didn't get any assignments, I could just wander out down the road in an old bus, and stories would just fall into my lap. You know, that was the idea I sold CBS on.
Charles Kuralt spent decades charming America with his warm voice and heartfelt stories.
A former member of one of those groups, 30 Palestinians at a mosque in Hebron.
Viewers saw him as honest, humble, and deeply rooted in traditional values. But when he died, everything changed. Hidden letters surfaced. And what they revealed shocked even those who thought they knew him best. A boy from the back roads. Long before Charles Kuralt became one of the most trusted and beloved voices in American journalism, he was simply a barefoot boy growing up on a tobacco farm in rural North Carolina. Kuralt was born in the port city of Wilmington in 1934, but only because that was the closest place with a hospital. His real childhood took place far from city streets. Kuralt was raised in Enslow County, surrounded by 100 acres of unpaved farmland. His family lived without electricity, without indoor plumbing, and without any of the modern conveniences many people take for granted. They used a gourd, hung from a nail, as a drinking cup. Their meals were cooked over a wood fire. At night, they read books and told stories by the soft glow of a lantern. Even in those early years, Kuralt showed signs of being deeply interested in the world around him. He had a fascination with stories, not just made-up ones, but real ones.
This is a story about Napoleon and Jefferson and Talleyrand and foreign intrigue in Paris.
He found creative ways to express this interest. He made kites out of old newspapers, flour paste, and string made from dried tobacco twine. He flew them so high that he liked to joke that God himself could read the news. For Kuralt, stories were more than entertainment. They were a way of making sense of the world. His love for storytelling came partly from his family. His grandmother shared vivid stories from her own childhood. She spoke of times when riflemen had to protect tobacco wagons from robbers hiding along the roads. These stories were not written down. They were told out loud and passed from one generation to the next.
This stone is a symbol of the American urge, the strongest urge in our history.
That oral tradition made a lasting impression on Kuralt. It taught him the power of storytelling, how words could preserve history, reveal character, and create a sense of community. Kuralt's early environment shaped how he saw the world. Life on the farm was not easy. There were no shortcuts. Everything required effort. But it also taught him about values like hard work, resourcefulness, and the importance of community. These lessons would later show up in the way he reported stories. He never lost his interest in the lives of ordinary people. To those who met him, Kuralt seemed built from another era, honest, calm, and devoted to doing things the right way.
Mainly for the reason that if we don't use it this week, why heck, we can use it next week. You know, it's not dated.
We're so glad to be able to see you at night again.
He didn't chase glory. He chased meaning. As Kuralt grew older, his family moved several times. They went to Washington, then to Steedman, and later to Atlanta. Eventually, they settled in Charlotte, where his father became the director of social services for Mecklenburg County. These moves exposed Charles to different parts of the South. He saw how people lived in different towns. He noticed both the beauty and the struggle. He began to understand that Southern life had many sides. There was tradition and culture, but also deep inequality and poverty. He saw firsthand how African Americans were treated unfairly and how entire communities were struggling just to get by. These experiences stayed with him. They shaped the quiet sense of justice that ran through everything he would later write. Even though Kuralt did not become a political activist, he found his own way to respond.
Mr. Carter called for a new foundation, control of inflation, easing of international tensions through an arms treaty with the Russians.
He chose to tell stories that made people pay attention. He did not shout or protest. Instead, he used his calm voice and strong writing to show what was happening. He believed that stories could move people to care. As Kuralt got older, his talent for writing and reporting grew stronger. People started to notice him. He moved quickly into the fast-paced world of journalism. In 1957, after earning recognition for his human interest reporting at the Charlotte News, he joined CBS News, a move that would turn his quiet Carolina voice into a national presence.
And we're not going to hurry through it. We have time for a background story on a major event.
The world he entered was filled with breaking news, pressure, and tight deadlines. But even in the middle of all that chaos, Kuralt stood out. His calm tone, thoughtful storytelling, and deep respect for ordinary people made him different from other reporters. Over time, he became a steady and trusted voice in a noisy world, the kind of man America believed they could truly know. To millions, Charles Kuralt represented honesty itself. His slow drawl, his gentle curiosity, and his unshakable decency came to define what people thought a journalist should be. That's why the truth, when it finally surfaced years later, left the nation stunned. The same man who had spent decades chronicling the quiet virtues of others had been quietly guarding secrets of his own. It wasn't the scandal that shocked people most. It was the idea that someone so good, so devoted, so impossibly genuine could have lived a second life no one ever suspected. As his career accelerated, so did the expectations placed upon him. Kuralt was stepping fully into the heart of American journalism, a world that demanded everything a man had to give. The pressure would test his balance between public devotion and private reality, setting the stage for a story far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. His voice, once a quiet presence in a noisy newsroom, was about to become one of the most familiar in American homes. Building the legend at CBS. By the time Charles Kuralt turned 23, he had already achieved something no one else at CBS News ever had. He became the youngest correspondent in the network's history.
Where he stopped, other men are beginning on this April afternoon in 1959.
In only a few short years, Kuralt had gone from calling minor league baseball games in Charlotte to hosting one of the biggest news shows on television. He became the anchor of Eyewitness to History, CBS's primetime current affairs program. That kind of leap would be impressive at any age, but for someone in his early 20s, it was almost unheard of. Kuralt had entered the spotlight faster than anyone expected, but instead of slowing down, his career was just getting started. In the early 1960s, CBS sent him on a major assignment. They stationed him in Latin America during a time when the region was in constant turmoil. One country after another was facing revolutions, political uprisings, and violent unrest. As CBS's chief correspondent for Latin America, Kuralt was suddenly responsible for reporting on events in 23 countries. The job was risky, it was intense, and it was dangerous. Kuralt traveled constantly and often found himself in the middle of violent situations. In Brazil, Haiti, and Cuba, he was forced to run from gunfire. He saw governments collapse and watched people take to the streets in protest. He was not just reporting from a distance. He was in the middle of the action, recording what he saw and heard as it happened. But with every country he visited, the line between work and life began to blur. He lived out of hotel rooms and slept on planes. Weeks turned into months, months into years. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. To colleagues, he seemed tireless, always moving, always composed. But behind that calm, Kuralt was learning something about the power of distance. A man who is never in one place too long can live many versions of himself, and no one ever notices. After Latin America, Kuralt returned to the United States just in time to cover the Vietnam War. That war was one of the most controversial and deadly in American history. Kuralt did not stay behind a desk. He embedded himself with American troops on the front lines. He went out with them on dangerous missions, sometimes under heavy fire. He captured footage that shocked American viewers back home. One Christmas, he filmed something that would never leave him. An American soldier was badly wounded. Kuralt's camera kept rolling. The soldier died while the film was still recording. That footage later aired on national television. There was no music, no narration, and no attempt to dramatize it. It was quiet, it was painful, and it was real. It showed people at home exactly what war looked like. Kuralt wasn't chasing thrills. He was chasing truth, but truth came with a price. Each story took a little more out of him, and he became more guarded, more private. A man whose gentleness hid how much he carried alone. After nearly 10 years of this kind of work, Kuralt began to feel exhausted. The constant danger, the non-stop travel, and the pressure to be first on the scene all took a toll. He started to wonder if journalism had to be about chaos. Maybe it could be about something quieter, something more human. So Kuralt came up with an idea. He pitched it to CBS, a program that would take him off the front lines and back onto the open road. He wanted to drive across America, stop whenever he wished, and tell stories about ordinary people. No scripts, no deadlines, just a camera, a map, and a motorhome. At first, CBS didn't take him seriously. The idea seemed too simple, too slow. But one executive decided to take a chance. They gave him a small budget and 3 months to prove it could work. No one expected what would happen next. What started as a side experiment quickly became the soul of a nation. The show on the road was everything Kuralt had ever hoped for. It gave him freedom, peace, and the chance to vanish into the quiet corners of America. To his viewers, it was wholesome and inspiring. Yet that same freedom, the endless travel and lack of routine, would eventually give Kuralt the ability to live a life apart from the one the world believed he had. It became the perfect cover for secrets that would remain hidden until long after he was gone. But before those secrets would come to light, America would come to see Charles Kuralt as something more than a journalist.
While traveling around this country of ours, I've come to appreciate the freedoms we Americans enjoy.
They would see him as the nation's gentle storyteller, the man who found beauty in the ordinary. America's gentle storyteller. When On the Road began, Kuralt did something few people in television had ever attempted. He completely changed what a news story could be. At a time when the nightly news was filled with reports from Vietnam, civil rights marches, and the growing scandal known as Watergate, Kuralt looked in a different direction. He focused on maple syrup makers in Vermont. He introduced viewers to 104-year-old joggers in Arizona. He brought attention to people whose names would have otherwise never been known. Kuralt believed that every person had a story worth telling. He visited one-room schoolhouses in remote towns. He interviewed blind mountain climbers and elderly bricklayers who still worked with pride well into their 80s. He spent time in small-town barbershops that had become unofficial meeting places where locals debated, argued, and passed the time. These were not stories about power or politics. They were stories about the endurance and quiet dignity of ordinary people. Kuralt showed that everyday life could be just as powerful as the major headlines. Behind the scenes, the work was far from glamorous. Kuralt and his cameraman lived almost entirely on the road. They moved from town to town, living out of 6 different motorhomes over the years. They prepared simple meals, sometimes just peanut butter crackers, and edited their footage in parking lots and at roadside stops. They rarely stayed in hotels and often slept wherever they could park for the night. There were no bright studios or big production crews. They made do with what they had and trusted their instincts. Things changed when producer Shad Northshield joined the team. He introduced portable editing equipment that allowed them to assemble complete segments without returning to New York. This new flexibility made a major difference. It allowed them to stay out on the road longer and send their finished stories back to CBS from wherever they happened to be. Kuralt no longer needed to return to the newsroom. The open road was his workplace and, increasingly, his home. The longer he stayed on the road, the more he seemed to need it. The constant travel gave him a sense of peace that he could not find anywhere else. It became his refuge, a moving world where he could be surrounded by people and yet remain entirely alone. He could vanish for weeks without raising questions. The country saw him as a man who went anywhere to tell a good story, and that reputation gave him all the space he would ever need. Kuralt's calm voice and simple storytelling style became a familiar comfort to millions. His segments often aired on Sunday mornings when the world was quiet. Viewers grew to expect them. They saw these short pieces as a rare chance to slow down and take a breath. But while Kuralt was shining a light on the beauty of other people's lives, he was carefully keeping part of his own life hidden. For decades, not his viewers, not his colleagues, not even his closest friends had the faintest idea. The secret life begins. A chance encounter in Reno. In the summer of 1968, something unexpected had happened to Kuralt in Reno, Nevada. He met Patricia Shannon, a community organizer and a divorced mother of 3. What was supposed to be just a simple dinner turned into a conversation that lasted all night long at a hotel lounge. That night marked the start of a secret that would stay hidden for nearly 30 years. At the time, Kuralt was still married to another woman, Suzanne Baird. To her, he was almost always traveling for work. That was true, but not the whole truth. While Kuralt was on the road, he wasn't just chasing stories for CBS. Patricia and her children quietly became a hidden part of his life. Kuralt helped move Patricia and her kids to Colorado. He paid for their schooling and supported her landscaping business. He visited as often as he could. Patricia's children didn't just see Kuralt as a visitor, they called him Pop. He gave her gifts like jewelry and even wrote her love poems. Every night, they talked on the phone. Their connection was strong and constant, but invisible to the outside world. No one at CBS had any idea. To millions of viewers, Kuralt was the kind man on their TV screens, the warm voice that felt like family. But behind the scenes, Kuralt was a master of hiding his tracks. He disappeared on assignments, but those trips were often trips into the secret life no one suspected. By the early 1970s, this secret relationship was no longer just a hidden part of his life. It was growing roots. What had started as a quiet secret was about to become much more than anyone ever expected. The Montana hideaway and the years of deceit. In 1970, Charles Kuralt made a decision that would change everything. He bought 20 acres of land along the Big Hole River in Montana, a stretch of wilderness so beautiful that it looked like it belonged on a postcard. When he told his wife about the purchase, he described it as a small fishing retreat, a quiet place to escape the pressure of city life. In truth, it was much more than that. The Montana land became the secret foundation of a private world he was building with Patricia Shannon. Kuralt built Patricia a small log cabin on the property where they could live without intrusion. A short walk away, he restored an abandoned schoolhouse and turned it into a private writing studio. Over time, the property grew from 20 acres to more than 90, becoming a self-contained world where no one asked questions and no one connected the pieces. The Big Hole River became their sanctuary, the one place on Earth where they could live as a family, far from cameras, deadlines, and the expectations of the world. They spent countless holidays there in secret. Kuralt taught Patricia's daughter how to drive on the dirt roads that wound through the valley. He gave her son a baseball glove and took him fishing, teaching him how to cast a line beneath the morning fog. They celebrated birthdays and Christmases as if no one else existed. Back in New York, his wife Suzanne believed her husband was away working or recovering from travel. She had no idea that her husband's fishing trips were spent with another family who called him Pop. Kuralt's generosity was constant and deliberate. He quietly sent Patricia more than $600,000, the equivalent of several million today. He bought her jewelry and helped pay for her children's education. He even purchased a small cottage for her in Ireland, a second refuge far from his professional life. To those who admired him, he was a picture of calm integrity. In private, he was juggling two separate worlds, each requiring more of him than he had to give. By the mid-1980s, the weight of this double life began to show. The endless travel that had once energized him now left him exhausted. He suffered from unexplained fatigue and joint pain that were eventually traced to lupus and heart complications. Friends began to notice that his movements were slower, and his once bright expression had dimmed. The constant secrecy, the letters, the explanations, and the lies were taking a toll. Kuralt began spending longer periods in Montana, telling colleagues that he went there to rest, write, and recover. The truth was that he went there to breathe freely, away from the roles that had consumed him. As the years passed, Montana became more than a secret refuge. It was the place where Kuralt confronted the reality that his two worlds could not last forever. His body was failing, and the careful walls he had built between his public and private lives were beginning to blur. Yet he could not bring himself to let go of either one. The road that had once symbolized freedom now felt like a burden that could no longer carry him. Every secret eventually reaches its breaking point. For Kuralt, that reckoning was already on the horizon. The man who had spent his life chronicling the quiet strength of others was about to face the silence of his own final chapter. The truth that had waited for decades would not surface until after his last breath. The letter that changed everything. In June 1997, Charles Kuralt lay in a New York hospital bed, a shadow of the man America thought it knew. His body was failing. Lupus had ravaged his strength, and his heart was giving out. Every breath came with effort. Yet even then, his thoughts drifted not to his wife or his career, but to Montana. With trembling hands, he wrote a short, cryptic note to Patricia Shannon. It read, "I'll have the lawyer visit the hospital to be sure you inherit the rest of the place in Montana if it comes to that." Just 16 days later, the voice that had comforted a nation fell silent forever. When the news broke, millions mourned.
Charles Kuralt had a knack for reminding America of its human side. The CBS newsman died Friday in New York.
America believed it had lost one of its purest souls, a man whose compassion had no limits. Colleagues at CBS spoke through tears, remembering his kindness, his gentle humor, and his ability to make every story feel human. But as they praised his honesty, the truth was already stirring, waiting to shatter everything they thought they knew. At the funeral, the first tremor hit. Patricia Shannon walked quietly into the church, clutching the same letter Kuralt had written from his hospital bed. The mourners turned and stared, unsure who she was or why she had come. When she spoke, her words cut through the room like glass. She had come to say goodbye to the man she loved. The shock was immediate. Friends, colleagues, and family froze in disbelief. Suzanne Baird, Kuralt's wife of 35 years, sat pale and silent as realization began to set in. The husband she had trusted completely, the man the world had adored, had lived a secret life for decades. The grief that had filled the church turned to confusion and quiet outrage. It was betrayal wrapped in disbelief. Soon the story broke beyond the funeral walls. Newspapers ran headlines filled with disbelief. The perfect journalist, the nation's gentle storyteller, had carried an unthinkable secret to his grave. What followed was not closure, but war. Patricia claimed the Montana land had always been meant for her, that Kuralt had promised it in his final note, and proved it through years of financial records, poems, and love letters. Suzanne, still stunned and grieving, fought to protect what she believed rightfully belonged to her family. Every new piece of evidence tore open another wound. The court read Kuralt's letters aloud, and the man who had once narrated the lives of strangers now had his own private words dissected before a nation. Then came the final blow. In 2000, the Montana Supreme Court delivered its decision. The judges ruled in Patricia's favor, declaring that the letter represented Kuralt's intent to leave her the land. The court ordered Kuralt's estate to pay nearly $1 million in taxes and settlements tied to the property. And just when it seemed the story could not grow darker, Patricia stepped forward. She refused to hide in shame or silence. She chose to tell her story herself. The memoir that unraveled the myth. In 2002, Patricia Shannon dropped a bombshell with her memoir, Charles and Me. The book tore apart the carefully polished image of Charles Kuralt that America had cherished for decades. Patricia did not hold back. She described a man who could be gentle and generous, yet haunted by restlessness. Kuralt, she wrote, was a man who could never sit still for long. The same curiosity that had made him a great storyteller also made him drift emotionally. He adored his wife, Suzanne, and respected her intelligence and loyalty. But over the years, their lives began to move in opposite directions. He was always on the road, chasing stories, chasing meaning, chasing peace. She built a life rooted in New York, surrounded by friends, art, and a steady rhythm. The marriage became polite, distant, and eventually quiet. Patricia's book made it clear that Kuralt had not stopped loving Suzanne. He had simply found a kind of peace with Patricia that he could not find anywhere else. The memoir was filled with intimate details. There were handwritten letters, pages of poetry, and photographs from their private world in Montana and Ireland. One letter stood out where Kuralt wrote, "I can't imagine my world without you in it. You are not my escape. You are my home." Suzanne Baird never wrote a public response, but friends later said the revelations devastated her. She had believed in her husband completely. For decades, she had defended his long absences, his silence, and his exhaustion. She had believed the work came first because he was dedicated to telling other people's stories. When the truth emerged, she withdrew from public view, refusing interviews and requests for comment. To those who knew her, it was as if she had lost him twice, first to his secret life, and then to death. The reaction to Patricia's book was immediate and divided. Some called it cruel and unnecessary, accusing her of exploiting a man who could no longer defend himself. Others saw it as a long overdue reckoning, a human story that revealed how even the most moral figures can live in contradiction. In the end, Patricia's memoir did not destroy Charles Kuralt's legacy. It complicated it. It reminded people that even the most trusted voices are still human, capable of both tenderness and deception. Kuralt once said, "There are no uninteresting people, only uninterested storytellers." Through his work, he had proved that again and again. Yet the hardest story for him to tell, and the one he never could, was his own. What do you think about this captivating video? Feel free to share your comments with us in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. What do you think about Kuralt's double life secret? Comment down below.